Douglas MacArthur was born on the 26th of January 1880 in Little Rock, Arkansas. But during the Second World War, between July 1942 and November 1944, he spent this extended period in the city of Brisbane, in the state of Queensland, Australia. But why was he there? What was his purpose? And why was it such a long period of time? Well, in today's video, we're going to find just exactly that. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to you all, from those down the road to the folks around the world. Welcome back to another video looking at Douglas MacArthur during the Second World War, mainly between 1942 and 1944. So without further ado, let's check out what was going on in that time. At the beginning of 1942, the Japanese were well and truly part of the Second World War conflict, and had brought into opposition the Americans as well. During the early months of 42, the Japanese had made swathing gains across Southeast Asia and were even so bold enough as to bomb the city of Darwin in Australia on the 19th of February 1942. And with the Japanese making such gains, Douglas MacArthur was in a bit of a tight squeeze. You see, Douglas MacArthur was the United States military advisor to the Philippines between 1935 and 1942, a position which was organized by respective presidents of both countries to create a defensive capability for the Filipino islands. And it was clearly a system that wasn't fully operational or even fully complete. So the Japanese were able to dismantle this new system of military might quite quickly. And so on the 22nd of February 1942, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt of America ordered his military advisor Douglas MacArthur to escape the Philippines and retreat to Australia. MacArthur didn't really leave the Philippines until the 11th of March 1942, when he boarded a ship sailing to Del Monte and arrived 2 days later. Meanwhile, a message had been sent to the air bases of the Northern Territory, telling a number of B-17 planes to fly over to the Del Monte airfield, pick up Douglas MacArthur and escort him back to Australian soil. MacArthur then headed towards a place known as Bachelor, and then further on still to the centre of Australia at the Alice Springs airfield. From Alice Springs, the rest of the journey was made by train, a slow process taking them as far as Adelaide by the 20th of March 1942, and then a further train to the city of Melbourne just a single day later. Now, between this date of March the 21st and the 23rd of July 1942, so about 4 months, a general HQ was established for the war effort dedicated to the Southwest Pacific area. And just a month after his arrival in the city of Melbourne, Douglas MacArthur became the Supreme Commander of this Southwestern Pacific area. The General HQ and its Supreme Commander in tow then moved to the city of Brisbane, where they would stay for the next year and a half, at a building which is now called aptly the MacArthur Chambers, but in 1942 was the old building for the Australian Mutual Providence Society. It was a new high-rise building and one of the most modern buildings in the city, and that is deliberately why it was chosen to be the site for this new HQ. MacArthur's office was located near the very top, on the 8th floor, which is where there is now a museum dedicated to MacArthur and the wartime effort of Brisbane. Douglas MacArthur spent the next 2 years negotiating with various governmental and military bodies, not only to resource the defence of the Australian nation, but in order to resource the military powers to push back against the Japanese in the Papua New Guinea campaign. MacArthur really struggled to negotiate with the officials in Washington, who were more focused on the wartime efforts in Europe and Africa against Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany. It probably didn't help that Douglas MacArthur wasn't too keen and had a strenuous relationship with the serving President Roosevelt. And in an act of defiance, hung in his office was not a portrait of President Roosevelt himself, but instead a portrait of George Washington, whom he felt was a better leader in times of war and struggle than this present-day successor. On the flip side, the Australian officials and government were very happy to have Douglas MacArthur on its continental shores. MacArthur was often invited to governmental briefings and shared a very cordial and pleasant relationship with the Prime Minister John Curtin. And it is because of this wartime bond that was forged by Douglas MacArthur and many hundreds and thousands of American soldiers passing not only through the streets of Brisbane, but many other cities across Australia, that in today's world these two Pacific neighbours hold such a close and tight relationship. MacArthur also had to negotiate with the American forces based in Hawaii. Although Pearl Harbor had been bombed in December 1941, the presence there was still very strong, and so MacArthur could draw on these forces to help him in the fight against the Japanese in Papua New Guinea. Towards the end of the campaign, during 1944, Douglas MacArthur would spend less and less time in his offices in Brisbane. He was very much involved, a hands-on approach to the campaigning going on in Papua New Guinea. In the months and years since he officially left Brisbane, November 1944, Douglas MacArthur was proclaimed a 5-star general on the 18th of December 1944. He oversaw the surrendering of the Japanese forces between the August and September of 1945, and he commanded the Allied forces in the occupation of the Japanese peninsula right up until the year 1951. On the 18th of April 1951, Douglas MacArthur was relieved of his command by the President Harry S. Truman. He had apparently been contradicting the official administrative statements made by the President and officials in Washington. When Douglas MacArthur returned to the United States, he returned to a hero's welcome. The man had a presence about him, and it is a sentiment that is shared by the Australian people alike. And in the year 1952, Douglas MacArthur would try for the 3rd time to become the Republican nominee for the presidential elections. His 2 attempts previously had been scuppered in various ways. In 1944, he tried for the first time, but because of his military positions at the time, he couldn't run and so had to withdraw. In 1948, he had lost to the governor of New York, Governor Dewey, whom in turn lost the election to Harry S. Truman. And in 1952, MacArthur would lose once again for the final time to Dwight Eisenhower, who would become the new president in the November elections. MacArthur's life is long and has been long associated with the Philippines and the Southeast Asian region, but it could also be associated with the city of Brisbane and the Australian nation, even if it was just a short time for which Douglas MacArthur was stationed there. And although Douglas MacArthur may have passed away in the April of 1964, his heroic wartime legacy will live long into the 21st century and live longer than his lifetime of achievements. And so I think I shall conclude this video right here. I hope you've learnt a lot about this little snapshot of Douglas MacArthur's life, and I hope to see you again next week for something a little bit different. But for now, have a good day.